Presented by Cursed by the Witch. Warning, use headphones before listening to horror podcast story.
Lost Souls of the Asylum is a haunting and atmospheric horror story that delves into the eerie history of an abandoned mental asylum, where the spirits of tortured patients still linger, and the sinister past refuses to stay buried. The story follows Grace, a young urban explorer, and her friends as they uncover the dark secrets hidden within the asylum's decaying walls, only to find themselves caught in a terrifying nightmare where the past and present collide in ways they could never have imagined. Part 1. The Asylum's Dark History. Once known as Blackwood Asylum, the institution was built in the late 1800s, a sprawling complex meant to house those deemed mentally ill or unfit by society. However, the asylum quickly gained a notorious reputation for its inhumane treatments and abusive practices. Patients were subjected to experimental surgeries, isolation, electroshock therapy, and other cruel methods meant to cure them, but instead left them broken and suffering. Many patients died within its walls, their bodies buried in unmarked graves behind the asylum, their families abandoning them as their conditions worsened. The head doctor, Dr. Gideon Hargrave, was known for his obsession with the mind and his experiments on patients who had no voice or rights. Some claimed he believed the key to immortality lay in the human brain, and rumors spread that he conducted unspeakable experiments in the asylum's secret underground rooms. After years of abuse, the asylum was shut down in the 1960s following a scandal that exposed its horrifying practices to the public. The building was left to rot, and the souls of those who died there were forgotten, until Grace and her friends decided to explore its haunted halls. Part 2. The urban exploration begins. Grace is an amateur photographer with a passion for exploring abandoned places, seeking out beauty in decay. When she stumbles upon rumors of Blackwood Asylum being haunted, she is immediately intrigued and convinces her friends, Mark, Sarah, and Ethan, to join her on a trip to the asylum. Though hesitant, her friends agree, lured by the thrill of the unknown and the chance to capture chilling photos and videos. The group arrives at the asylum late in the evening, the setting sun casting long shadows across the dilapidated building. Its windows are shattered, and the walls are overgrown with ivy, but there's an eerie beauty in its decay. The atmosphere is immediately unsettling. Despite the emptiness of the building, it feels alive, as if the walls themselves are watching them. The group enters through a broken side door and is greeted by the cold, stale air of the asylum's interior. The air is thick with the sense of abandonment and something darker, something lurking just beneath the surface. Part 3. Strange Occurrences. As they explore the asylum, Grace and her friends begin to experience strange phenomena. It starts small, whispers echoing through the hallways, shadows darting in the corners of their vision, and the feeling of being watched. In one room, Grace finds old patient files scattered across the floor, detailing the horrific treatments patients endured. One name in particular stands out, Emily Cartwright, a young woman who had been committed for hearing voices and claiming she could see the dead. The records show that Emily was subjected to cruel experiments, but there's no record of her death or discharge. As the night wears on, the paranormal activity escalates. Doors slam shut on their own, and the sounds of footsteps can be heard echoing from empty hallways. Sarah, who is sensitive to spiritual energy, begins to feel overwhelmed by the oppressive atmosphere and insists they leave. But Grace, driven by her curiosity, convinces the group to stay just a little longer, determined to capture more footage. In one of the lower levels of the asylum, they discover a hidden staircase that leads to a basement not shown on the building's blueprints. The air becomes colder as they descend, and a foul smell wafts up from the depths. They find themselves in a series of dark, narrow hallways, lined with rooms that resemble cells more than treatment rooms. Inside these cells, they find disturbing remnants of the past, rusted shackles, bloodstains, and walls covered in cryptic carvings and scratch marks. This is where the worst of Dr. Hargrave's experiments must have taken place. Part 4. The Spirits Awaken. It's in the basement that things take a turn for the terrifying. As Grace snaps photos, her camera glitches, and when she reviews the footage, she sees the faint outlines of figures in the background, translucent shapes with hollow eyes, watching them. The temperature drops dramatically, and the whispers grow louder, more distinct. It's no longer random murmurs but voices calling out names, pleading for help, and warning them to leave. Suddenly, Ethan is thrown against a wall by an unseen force, and the group panics. The spirits are no longer just watching, they are actively interacting with them. Grace and her friends try to flee, but the building seems to shift around them. Hallways that once led to the exit now loop back on themselves, trapping them inside. The spirits of the asylum's former patients have awakened, their anger and pain manifesting as violent poltergeist activity. Desperate to escape, they run deeper into the building, hoping to find another way out. Part The Unraveling. As they navigate the labyrinthine hallways, Grace begins to hear a voice in her head, whispering her name. At first, she thinks it's just the stress of the situation, but the voice becomes more persistent, calling her to a specific room at the heart of the asylum. Against her friend's protests, she follows the voice, feeling drawn to it. The room she enters is small, with a single bed and a large mirror on the wall. It's Emily Cartwright's room. The mirror, covered in dust, reflects a distorted version of reality. As Grace wipes away the grime, she sees Emily's reflection staring back at her, her hollow eyes filled with sorrow. Emily begins to speak to Grace, telling her the truth about what happened in the asylum. She reveals that Dr. Hargrave used her in his experiments, not just as a patient, but as a conduit for the spirits trapped in the asylum. He believed that through Emily, he could harness the power of the dead and achieve immortality. The experiments drove Emily to madness, and when she finally died, her spirit remained trapped in the asylum, along with the other patients who suffered under Hargrave's cruel hand. Emily warns Grace that she and her friends are now marked. The spirits see them as intruders, but they also see them as new vessels, fresh bodies to inhabit and use to escape the asylum. The only way to survive is to leave immediately and never return. Part 6. No escape. Panicked, Grace runs back to her friends, but it's too late. Mark is missing, and when they find him, he's in a catatonic state, his eyes staring blankly ahead. The spirits have begun to take control of him, using his body as a host. The building itself seems to come alive, walls shifting and closing in on them as the spirits grow stronger. Grace, Sarah, and Ethan try to drag Mark to safety, but they are relentlessly pursued by the spirits, who manifest as shadowy figures, their faces twisted in agony. In a final, desperate attempt to escape, the group finds an old service tunnel that leads to the outside. As they crawl through the narrow space, the spirits claw at them, pulling at their limbs and whispering in their ears, trying to drag them back. One by one, they manage to crawl out into the night, gasping for air as they emerge from the asylum's grip. But the horror doesn't end there. As they catch their breath, they realize that Mark is still under the spirit's control. His eyes are hollow, and when he speaks, it's not his voice, but the voices of the lost souls trapped inside him. The spirits have followed them, using Mark as their vessel to escape the asylum. The group realizes with growing dread that they haven't truly escaped, they've only brought the nightmare with them. Themes and atmosphere. Lost Souls of the Asylum is a story that blends supernatural horror with psychological terror, exploring the idea of being trapped, not just physically, but spiritually. The asylum, a decaying monument to human suffering, becomes a living entity, a character in its own right, housing the restless souls of the patients who died within its walls. The themes of guilt, abandonment, and revenge permeate the story, as the spirits seek to punish those who disturb their eternal rest. The atmosphere is one of claustrophobia and dread, with the asylum's dark, crumbling halls serving as the perfect setting for a ghost story. The spirits are not just passive entities, they are malevolent, filled with the pain and rage of their tortured existence, and they seek to inflict that suffering on anyone who dares enter their domain. The story builds tension through its eerie setting and the escalating paranormal activity, leading to a terrifying conclusion where escape is impossible, and the past refuses to stay buried.
Thank you for watching. Just like and subscribe.